Hey kids, howdy and welcome to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. Joe and I are here. It's June 9th. I still can't believe how fast this year is going. I mean, it sounds like such a silly little trope to say, ooh, time seems so fast. But
right.
I'm having an experience of that's like unnatural. It just seems fast. And maybe it's... who knows what it is. At any rate, we're in June. This is the week of Jupiter's ingress into Cancer, so that's a big deal and exciting for both the people for whom this will impact directly, but also for all of us, because Jupiter is our planet of manifestation, and this sign change is going to be a big deal. But of course, before we get to the astrology of the week, I have one announcement. I'm actually announcing this like 2 weeks in advance of the class starting, because on June 28th, that's my next process class, and it's my Healing Your Anxious Attachment class. So I'm announcing it this weekend, next week, because I fucking love this class so much. And I've only taught it once. I created it last year. And the reason I love this class so much is that attachment issues are something I could have taught about back when I got my master's and doctorate in psychology. It's not like I don't have the information to teach people about how anxious attachment works and how to maybe move through it and heal it a little bit. And then I had this astrological transit where Saturn, the planet of lessons and responsibility, crossed over my Chiron a year ago, which I thought was going to be so like light and breezy. It's a demand. Saturn always demands to go into the childhood wound a little bit. But I figured, I've been here 60 years. I've healed the childhood wound. How bad could this be? Well, the long COVID amplified depression and anxiety met Saturn conjuncting my Chiron, and I lost my mind for 3 months, which led me to have to go get medicated for my mental health. But Zoe, I used this wild trigger of my body that was kind of unnatural, right? Because it was coming from neural inflammation that was causing some, amplified depression and anxiety. But I used this time where a relationship dynamic was triggering me like I was 17 years old. By the way, also a 6-year relationship that was running wildly fine for 5 years suddenly was like, why am I having all of these experiences? So I held that process very powerfully as I worked through the things that were coming up. And that process turned into this class. And I almost feel like my higher self gifted me with a mental breakdown, because I was able to use what was happening in my unconscious, but with a 60-year-old perception capacity. And so this class really does take people through understanding what their attachment style is, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, which is a combo of both, and then gives you some inner child process work to find ways to move through and past the limits of your attachment. It's a very long announcement, but I really, really love this class, and I want lots of people to take it.
This is kind of one of those topics, too, where I think not everyone realizes they might need this.
Oh, God, yeah. Well,
help.
Yeah, and if you're one of those people, just go out on a date or two and watch that anxious attachment just suddenly come to life. So we have a question. This is actually a really short question that somebody just actually went onto the website to find the contact form named Kalina. I think I'm saying that right, Kellina. So Kalina writes, what significance do stelliums and empty houses in your birth chart have? I love this question because of the empty houses. We talked about stelliums, I think, about 2 or 3 podcasts ago. So just a quick review. A stellium is 3 or more planets and points at the same place. They all have to be within a couple of degrees of each other. And a stellium just means an amplification of the consciousness of the planets involved through the lens of the sign that they are all in. They can be very valuable in terms of a person's energy, sort of having a lot of focus in one dynamic. That's a stellium. Empty houses is an important thing to understand, especially for the people who are new to astrology, because it's a likely thing that someone will look at their chart for the first time, and one of the first questions they will ask is, why is that place empty? Why is that empty? So let's start in terms of answering the questions about empty houses is that there is no such thing as empty in astrology. The chart we're looking at is a 2-dimensional map, and when you take 3-dimensional consciousness and shove it down into 2 dimensions, you don't have that 3rd dimension to have a dynamic experience of it, so you look at the flat 2-dimensional image of your chart, and something looks empty because your eye sees nothing there. But if you remove the idea of it's a flat 2-dimensional like picture and just imagine the planets or the solar system at that moment and like take away the structure of the paper that the thing is printed on and the chart that divides it up into 12 parts, and now you just have the sort of 9 bodies of the solar system and the luminaries and the points all sort of dancing their dynamic dance with each other. And in that perspective, there's nothing empty. They're just dancing a dance in a shape that was the shape of what the planets were doing at your birth. So yes, if they're spread out a little bit, there might be houses that are empty. But first and foremost, before I answer the question with a little bit more specificity, I want you to understand first that there is no such thing as empty. It's a 3-dimensional thing that's being described 2-dimensionally. Okay, so first of all, there's no such thing as empty because every house has a chart ruler. So when you look at the chart, that is your birth map, each one of the lines that marks the different 12 houses will have a little symbol on it, and that's the sign that rules that house. So when you're looking at a house that has planets in it, you certainly would consider the sign that rules the house, but the planets would take such precedence in your, at least as an astrologer for me, the planets count for everything, way more than the signs and the houses they're in. This is why it's okay to have a reading when you don't know what time you were born. At least you don't, with me, because I focus so much on the transits hitting planets, I don't get as involved, at least in sessions, about like, oh, well, this sign rules that house. But if you're looking at your chart, you can make a lot of assessment and sort of observational, consideration by looking at the consciousness of the house and then just take the archetype of the sign and say, that's how I deal with spiritual consideration. I got Capricorn on the 9th house. That's why I was slow and steady with learning and sort of myopically focused on climbing the mountain of my awareness. Right? So there's your 9th house perfectly expressing itself, ruled by its chart sign thingy. I said that badly, but now you could go a little further with this and go to the ruling planet of the sign and get a little more distinction, right? So I use the example of somebody with Capricorn in the 9th house cusp. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and so then you can use the ruling planet to sort of color how you would interpret the empty house. Now, in the world of transits, you have what I call proximity transits. So I'm very interested when I'm working with charts in the geometry of the transiting planets hitting the chart, because that describes the raw materials that we are making our lives with day to day. But proximity transits count, meaning when a planet moves through a house, that's activating the house significantly. So as an example, we're going to talk about Jupiter moving into Cancer, that whatever house is ruled by Cancer in your natal chart will be lit up by the idea of expansion and manifestation while the transiting planet is in that house. And while that's not an understanding of the chart at large, it's certainly an understanding of that house that's empty being lit up by the transiting planet. And the same thing would apply to progressed planets moving into houses in the natal chart. So the last thing I want to say to wrap it up is that like they're less complex if the house is empty, but could not be less important. Each house has 1/12 of importance. 1/12? Yeah, right? Yeah. See, 360 divided by 12. Each house is a full pie piece of your psyche. So your fourth house is your full pie piece of home, and your fifth house is the full pie piece of creative expression. So an empty house is not less complex. It's still a room in your house and just as valid. And the emptiness or fullness of it does not shift or alter anything.
How's the astrology looking?
Well, there's something happening today that makes it a good week. Jupiter is moving into Cancer today. In fact, at 1:02 p.m. Pacific time today, the planet of manifestation, expansion, good fortune, luck, if you believe in luck, moves out of Gemini and into Cancer. There's so many reasons why this is yummy. One is the sign that Jupiter's moving into. Jupiter has been in Gemini for the last year, and he is not happy in Gemini. It's the sign of his...
Detriment?
Yes. He rules Sagittarius, and the opposite sign to Sagittarius is Gemini. So any planet in the opposite sign of their ruling sign is thought to be debilitated, and the term we use is detriment. It's detrimental for the planet to be there. I would say there's always got to be an archetypal explanation for that, or it's not worth even having it there, right? I mean, it's like if it's a rule, it has to make sense archetypally, or I would reject it. And the reason why I accept Gemini as being a difficult sign, if Jupiter expands and creates opportunity and uses our thoughts to create form, because that's how the instrument works, right? If we're going to get expanded form and bounty from Jupiter, it's at the personal level going to start with a thought that turns into the abundance you desire. Whether you're manifesting or we're just talking about that sometimes life is nice and Jupiter is there, but in Gemini, there's too much scattered thought for powerful directed manifestation. You have to know what you want in the manifestation game because it's like an amorphous thing that we do when we manifest, and your unconscious thoughts count more than your conscious thoughts. Gemini is where we invented the debate and the argument and the look at both sides and to consider it all. That's a beautiful thing in the archetype itself. Gemini gets a bad rap, and I know there are people with Sun in Gemini who's like, why does Gemini always get such a bad rap? Why? Because we are thinking mechanisms. Thinking sucks. And Jupiter thinks so too. Jupiter's like, you're thinking too much. You're debating too much. How can I manifest something for you if one of you wants one thing and the other twin wants something else?
Yeah.
So Cancer has Jupiter operating from like the king's throne room, if you will. If your home is your castle, Cancer invented your home, and you are king inside the castle of your home. and ruled by the moon, which, what did I say just a few minutes ago? Your unconscious thoughts carry more weight in the manifestation consciousness. So Jupiter in Cancer takes advantage of the connection to the moon, and therefore our unconscious desires can meet our conscious awareness of the thought we're going to manifest. And the moon's connection sort of brings the magic and the phases and the timing where Jupiter will say yes. Yes, you can have this thing. You might have to go through the phases to get it. But either way you describe it, Jupiter is happier and more powerful for us in the sign of Cancer. There's another reason why I like this passage better than Jupiter's movement through Gemini, is that while, well, let me say it this way. We like Jupiter retrogrades because if Jupiter's going to go backwards for a few months, he will triple transit some things. Like when I'm in a session, and there's a Jupiter hit, I might say, oh, too bad this is not a triple transit, because that means it would come back again by retrograde and then Jupiter would hit it a third time, and whatever transit that was would be a significant expansion as opposed to a single hit by Jupiter, which would be like a mood. A good mood, right? So when Jupiter was in Gemini, he retrograded very early on in what we call the first decan. The decans are just groups of 10, 20, 30. The first 10, the middle 10 degrees, the third 10 degrees is called a decan. And so because of that, Jupiter didn't create more opportunities from the very center of the sign the way he will with Cancer. This happens in the fall, but it makes the end of the year and the beginning of 26 really yummy for anybody who's got placements in your chart of anything that's 25 degrees and above. That's where Jupiter will get to. And so we're going to benefit from Jupiter retrograding in this sign in the sort of middle decan of the 30 degrees. So if you lean into the moon connection to the Cancer sign, the archetype that's governing Jupiter's movement for the next year, there's something about the sort of dark, wet, nighttime sort of fertility that the moon brings, right? If manifestation is to plant seeds of intention in the fertile soil of the law that thoughts become form, then Jupiter in the sign where the wetness is and the fertility is, which is the moon's consciousness, then that's more of a way that we can describe Jupiter in Cancer as being more effective at creating new things and actual blessings. If you want to sit down with your chart and do a little sort of looking at this, and you're maybe not as advanced as some others who'll be able to do this with greater ease. One of the things you can do is absolutely first look at the Cancer house in your natal chart. That is the area of your psyche that will be most lit up for the next 12 months, which harkens back to something we talked about when we answered the question today. So by proximity, your Cancer house will be amplified this year. And then, working with seeing how Jupiter is transiting your chart is not that difficult. It's just about math. And if you sat in geometry class in junior high school and you hated it, this part of astrology will be hard for you. But for example, if Jupiter stations retrograde in October at 25 degrees of Cancer, and we use an orb of influence of 20, we'll say 22 to 27 degrees. I fudged there because I just like the orbs to be tighter. More geometrically accurate. But if you have any planets in those early 20 degrees, you can just look at your chart for any planet or point at the same or similar numbers. Anything in your chart near 25 degrees is going to get hit by Jupiter when he goes retrograde. I'm just using this particular moment as an example. You got to look at this for the whole year, but that's how you do it. You got a 25-degree rising sign, 25-degree that, and then Jupiter's going to make contact. You count how many signs apart they are. Each sign gets 30 degrees worth of geometry, and that's a way to sit down and anticipate some of the ways that Jupiter is going to touch other planets in your chart, bringing his capacity to expand everything he touches. I love this for all of us kids. It's going to be easier to get through the next year because the planet that brings us good fortune is very close to the vest. We have our full moon in Sagittarius this Wednesday. 21 degrees of Sag. So you've got the sun in Gemini. The moon will be in Sag. And this is a full moon about thoughts, perception, and like rising up to a higher level of same. So we're in Gemini season. So it's funny that we talked about the fact that Gemini gets a bad rap, making people with sun in Gemini feel a little self-conscious. But it is because we are thinking beings, and everything about our experience on Earth is about our perceptions. Like, we know this scientifically in ways that we didn't. When I was born, we weren't quite as aware of just how much vibration and light we can't see. Like, humans, we're so limited in what we could perceive. I think if we suddenly were rendered capable of perceiving everything, it would fry our minds, right? So we are supported by the tiny limitations of our perceptions. But because the sun is in the sign that invented that we have perceptions, then the sun is shining conscious awareness on how are we thinking? What are we thinking? How are we oriented towards our thinking and perception? Do you feel grounded with your vision and clear about what you want to do, or you're still in debate land? That's one of the shadow artifacts of Gemini. So the opposite sign is the eradication of debate. And what would that be? The opposite of debate would be truth. Sagittarius even knows that there's no such thing as truth. You know, in a large way, there's no such thing as truth because there's so many kinds of truth: objective, subjective, personal, transpersonal. Sagittarius understands all of that. And so when the sun and the moon meet up in these signs, remember, it's the moon that carries the transformation or the work. So if we're aware of the thought paradigms we're having, we're releasing things that keep us from being more powerful in moving through the world because we I keep saying that word amplify. I get a word in my head and then suddenly I'm using it, every day for 6 days in a row. So in the full moon of Sagittarius, we can release lower thoughts for higher thoughts, not amplified thoughts, right? But even just the idea of fear and faith, one twin is faithful and the other twin is terrified, and Sagittarius will lean towards the one that is most true. And since fear is always a sort of added or false construct, right, then the truth of Sagittarius is that we can do anything. We can get through anything. We can create a change in our perceptions. In fact, it's the only thing that we can change.
Yeah.
We can't change our bodies. We can't change, we can't even really change our wounded patterns. We can change the perception of them. Right? Wounds don't go away. Chiron understands this. Chiron says we can change the perception of our wounds and then they don't appear as wounds any longer. And we do that at the level of the mind. So that's the gestalt of a full moon in Sagittarius is that we're moving towards higher levels of thought, truth, interaction, exploration, study, travel. Sagittarius rules all of those things. Jupiter invented travel. In fact, if I see people's charts that have a lot of ninth house placement, which is Sagittarius's house, therefore Jupiter is engaged in the ninth house consciousness, that person's likely to be an expatriate or live in many different places or have a bug to travel and learn.
And you've told me that.
Because it's in your chart?
Yeah, you told me very recently you wouldn't be. You were like, I wouldn't be surprised if you expatriated sometime in the future.
Well, there you go. I mean, I don't remember what your chart looks like, but what it means is you probably have your North Node in the ninth house, which means your Dharma and destiny does have to be around learning, exploring, traveling, and maybe moving in that way. So I love that. Thank you for bringing that home. So Jupiter rules this full moon, and Jupiter just moved into Cancer the day or so before. So there's something juicy about the fact that the ruler of this moon returned to his domicile like 48 hours before the lunation is exact. It's like a party. It's a coming home party where we welcome all of our hopeful possibility, our sense that the future can be bright if we, love what we're creating, and release the lower vibration of fear and doubt and, thoughts that the world is too crazy. Why should I bother trying to create something new if it's all going to burn down in a year or two? And it's like, well, resilience tells us we move anyway. A lot of the lunations lately have been jam-packed with energy because they've aligned with Pluto or Saturn in some direct geometrical way. And so a lot of our full moons and new moons have had this sort of overwhelming power where I'd say, oh my God, it's going to knock you on your ass. And this is not that. There is no direct connection with Pluto or Uranus enough to, generate that language of, watch out, maybe take the day off and, stay at home. It's not that, but there's a heaviness to the lunation that you might feel as an energy of the week. And it's important for us to mention this setup as you approach a lunation where you want to line up what you're ready to let go of in a kind of prayerful, ritualistic way. Right? As you know, I always support, if you don't know what you're letting go of, just say, I am now ready to release everything known and unknown, conscious and unconscious, that limits my thoughts and perceptions from seeing the world as a magical place where I am on fire. So there's your prayer for the full moon if you don't have anything specific. And just know that there's an importance to what we move through this lunar cycle because Saturn and Neptune are together in the first degrees of Aries. So the teacher and our spiritual connection is squaring Jupiter and Mercury, who are just a few degrees away from the sun. And because Jupiter has just moved into Cancer and Mercury preceded him by a couple of days, Saturn and Neptune by conjunction are squaring Jupiter and Mercury by conjunction in this lunation. This square is not like directly dialed in mathematically. If it was, I would be saying something like, I don't know if I'd be saying something like, Saturn's going to kick your fucking ass if you don't do the right thing. Even so, this square is interesting to me because of all of what we've talked about today about how important our perceptions are in the game of manifestation. And that's a Mercury thing. The fact that Mercury is right there in Cancer, sort of, he opened the door to Jupiter, said, hey, come on in. And then Jupiter follows today. So that the perception planet, Mercury, is literally rolling around with Jupiter, sort of saying, how can we empower you, Mercury, to be filled with my Jupiter sense of largesse and possibility and yumminess? And the answer is by doing the fucking work. Square Saturn and Neptune. That's it. So this is a moment of joyful possibility if and as we release the perceptions that limit our belief that we can have joyful possibility. And Saturn puts a demand in this that, yes, we're going to feel as some breakdowns, slowdowns in the week in terms of the general energy and things you might bump into. But the power of like doing the work is generated by Saturn's participation. Even if it's not comfortable, the teacher's a little stern, but he means it. Like, he's stern because it's like, if we don't allow, we'll be more uncomfortable later. The moon will be trining Chiron. Chiron just hung out with Venus a couple of weeks ago, sort of participating in Venus's retrograde mechanizations around the planet. And now he's at just the right degree where he's trining the moon and sextiling the sun, which means our healing work of the last, months, years, will funnel us right into this moment of release, right? So it doesn't have to be just about releasing everything from the last 2 weeks of this lunar cycle. I really invite you to, and if you want to, go all the way back to childhood, because if Chiron's in the room, then we're thinking about the whole length of our wounded experience, where we should be at a place, depending on your age and chronology, of wounds turning into the perception of skills and superpowers. And I think this full moon has that built into it because of Chiron's placement. Now, Mars is over in Leo. That's going to generate a grand fire trine between the moon, so the juice of the lunation, Chiron, the capacity to heal and dramatically change perceptions, in a full moon that's about changing perceptions, and then Mars, the planet of the body and action and movement, free from his past retrograde, challenges, and readier than ever to have us more balanced between what we have to do and the rest and preparation needed. That's what he learned in Cancer. And so now in this lunation, he forms this gorgeous grand fire trine of unconscious transformation, healing, and embodiment that we can put into like a lighter load as we move forward. You can think of a full moon helping us release, and this grand fire trine, just like fire's combustion, they burn up wound. This grand fire trine can purify our embodiment, so that, in fact, while the unconscious is doing its good work of helping us release patterns, the atmospheric setup is got like this fabulous flamethrower of healing as part of it. The last thing I want to share about the lunation is that it T-squares the nodes of the moon. So the nodes of the moon right now are at 23 degrees. South node in Virgo, north node in Pisces. The nodes tell us what we're moving away from and what we're moving toward. So south node in Virgo is moving away from perfectionism, getting so mired in details that you lose flow. Any of the shadow of Virgo is what we're leaving behind. And we're moving towards guided by spirit. Pisces is our connection to the divine, and so Virgo lets go of human control, and Pisces North Node allows us to vibe with, divine control, if you will. So the sun and the moon at like 20 degrees of Gemini and Sagittarius is a fairly tight T-square with the nodes. If the lunation was at 23, I'd be really happy because that would be exact. So this is hopefully to help you guys understand. It's not a 90-degree square. It's an 87-degree square, but we still consider it a square. So what does that mean? It means a moment of sort of change because it's a mutable square. Undeniable change because they're squares. You don't avoid or skip or maneuver around a square. It's the throw you to the ground energy. Now, it does not have to knock you on your ass this week. It's part of a lunation. So I'd rather have you think of this as an archetypal moment. Whereas the sun and the moon is allowing us the ability to go into deep places in our psyche to transform how we perceive. Mutability is the modality that allows change, right? Planets are either fixed, mutable, or cardinal. Cardinal energy starts things up, fixed things keep things solid and steady and immovable. And the mutable signs, which are the 4 signs here, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius. So the whole lunation suggests morphing, shape-shifting, changing. So allow that capacity to move you into new shapes. And just remember, it's all about changing how you perceive things, not the things themselves. So there's an interesting square between Jupiter and Saturn that hit Sunday morning. And it felt important to talk about because they're both in new signs. Like, if they squared and they were in the middle of their processes, I probably wouldn't mention it unless it was such an empty week that I would have to have things to talk about. But I'm going to talk about it here because it's a major moment when any planet changes signs, but it's fascinating to me that Saturn and Jupiter, the social planets, did this essentially at the same time. So with each of these ingresses, there's like a whole dynamic that we have to like get used to. So with Saturn in Aries, all of the way we learn lessons and meet responsibility and experience things like discipline and life as a lesson will be much more immediate, a little fiery. Aries energy is like, let's go. Aries energy says, let's go without any thought about consequences. So loosely speaking, everybody will fall into like one binary or the other. The person who is too impulsive, and that's been problematic, if you keep that up, Saturn's going to kick your ass. And if you're somebody who can't find the fires of startup, Saturn in Aries will demand that of you and might send you some difficult processes to get you somehow to light yourself up and get started with whatever it is that feels important to you in your life. I think that's an abrupt change to go from Saturn in Pisces to Aries. I'm not so sure that Jupiter moving into Cancer will be something like challenging we have to acclimate to, whereas Saturn would be. I think Jupiter coming into a sign of his exaltation will be an easy shift, especially because of the Cancer sign that makes our experience of it internal. So just spend the week knowing that Jupiter is in this new yummy sign that you have a more intimate relationship with. And then just look at the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. All of us are going to be having some sort of experience where the have-tos and the get-tos collide. Saturn is the have-to, Jupiter is the get-to. And when they square each other, we're going to be confronted with how well we, at an individual level, are balancing responsibility and expansion, structure and joy. So that's sort of the invitation here. Isn't so much, we all got to pay attention to the square on Sunday, because if I didn't tell you about it, kids, I would sleep well tonight. But because they both change signs, it's just there's an interesting observational opportunity as the weekend is ending to just take inventory of how well or well not you are experiencing a balance between that which your life demands of you and hopefully the joyful sort of rewards you get for a job well done. Have at it, everybody.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
Today we have an email and dream about lions. Um, this this email is from Megan, and it's titled "Sad/Creepy Lion Interpretation." She says, "Hi, Michael and Zoe. I want to start out by saying I love listening to you guys each week and appreciate your wisdom, Michael."
Thank you.
She's sharing two dreams, but I'm just reading one.
Okay.
And this is the one she wants to prioritize if I only read one. On May 6th, I dreamt the following. I was in some kind of warehouse where an old lion was living/being held with his handler, a middle-aged man. It was a totally bare bones room. I was in the room with a small group of people, but they weren't people I knew or recognized. It was like we were on a tour of the building or something, and the lion and handler were separated from us, the way things are roped off in a museum. The lion seemed sad, and I felt like there was a knowing that he and the handler had escaped suffering at the circus and were retired. The handler was telling us, sort of bragging, how the lion would not hurt him. The lion started walking towards him, and he wanted to show what he meant. He moved closer to the lion, and the lion sat and opened his mouth so wide it became a pelican's mouth almost. In parentheses, she says, it was very exaggerated and unrealistic, like something you'd see in a cartoon.
Got it.
So this was like a dream opening. But in a weirdly calm and unaggressive seemingly way. The handler went over and put his head in the lion's mouth as if it was something he always did. Suddenly, the scene shifts and it's extremely bright, and it seems that I am standing over the handler in a hospital bed, looking down at him.
Ooh.
He's basically nothing but a bloody head with like shreds of a body.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
Hard cut.
Yeah, right.
The image was extremely frightening and creepy, and again, almost cartoonish. He suddenly comes to and realizes what has happened, and I just see this literal head crying and shaking side to side, screaming in utter panic. Why did you do this to me? Name of the lion.
Yeah.
The lion. She doesn't remember the name of the lion. And then I woke up.
So the handler screams to
why
the
did you
lion.
do this to me?
Right. Why did you do this to me?
And then she wakes up. She puts some info later and says, I'm in my early 30s, single with no children, but do eventually want them. Her second dream was about babies.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And she says, thank you for all that you do. Love and light, Meg.
You know, read the second dream for me. I'll prioritize this one, but I'd love to know what the next dream was.
Cool. Yeah. And they were back to back. So.
Okay. Even more so than I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's short. So
okay, great.
The next night, May 7th, I had the following dream. I remember very few details about this one, but the main thing was that I just had a baby girl and was trying to get her to breastfeed with no luck. I was at my home in the dream, but it wasn't actually a home I'm familiar with in real life. I put the baby down in the bassinet/crib, and then I either forgot about her or was intentionally trying to leave her alone for a bit.
Hmm.
I'm not certain about that part, but I feel like I felt some shame around it. I then recall picking her up again and trying again with breastfeeding and wondering if there was something wrong with me, that maybe I was defective and I didn't produce any milk. I don't remember a specific ending to the dream.
Huh. But it sounds like she is saying that the last thing she describes is trying again.
Yes, and wondering if she's defective.
Well, I mean, I certainly think it's important to acknowledge that she chose to tell us that she has, thoughts of, future babies, and so that the baby dream, she probably told us that because the second dream is about babies,
Yeah.
though I would, be leaning more, Megan, into just the idea that the second dream tells us that the first dream is describing something new that's wanting to be born in you, in your psyche, that, maybe you're not quite ready for or can't quite feed, right? So babies aren't always literal in dreams. Though this could be talking about you being, connected to a desire to be a mom, and the dream's showing you that it's, not quite yet. You're not quite ready to feed. Breast is about feeding. It's a literal image because it's a baby trying to suckle the breast. But any breast in a dream is going to make me think who's being fed and who's doing the feeding. So certainly the second dream, if we remove the literal baby thing, the consideration is I'm creating something new, but I'm not sure if I have the wherewithal to give it my breast. So that's clear as a bell to me.
I feel like the lion is also a baby in a sense that it's like the child of the handler.
Okay.
Right?
All
Like it's under the care of the handler. Like, are these two dreams linked in that way? Or
what I
even though
like
they're
about
old,
what you're showing here, but what you're pointing out, so, is that the handler is the hero of the first dream, right? And Megan is the hero of the second dream. The lion is not the hero of the first dream. The handler is. So yes, indeed, the lion, in that way, like air quotes, belongs to the handler.
yes.
So, yes, the handler birthed this sort of lion consciousness. Remember, it's Megan's dream, so the handler and the lion both live inside of her.
Mm-hmm.
So the handler would be a kind of masculine energy that stewards passion, power, leadership, all the lion qualities, ferocity. But when Megan is in the witnesser of the dream, she's going to identify with the handler as opposed to the lion. Right? She goes to visit him in the hospital, right? Her connection is to the handler. So let's drop back to something that she said as the setting of the dream. It's a warehouse. Warehouses are very specifically about storage, putting things in abeyance, things you maybe need to store and have lots of. There's some utility in warehouse consciousness that's different than big building, right?
Yeah.
Or hall or empty concrete slab. There's all kinds of ways she could describe this large space, but she called it a warehouse, which means there's something that Megan is moving into, leaning into, that's been stored, waiting, right there in her internal, warehouse, the warehouse of her mind. So the mouthpiece is interesting to me, right? I'm going to always go to throat chakra, communication, strong voice when anything is about the mouth, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where our creation center is. We don't create anything in the world without our voice. And so I'm going to slip away from some of the details to make this point. and then I'll come back and shade it in with some of the details. Let's just pretend that because the handler is like middle-aged, he's been around a while in Megan's psyche. Maybe he's even the guide to Megan's moments of trying to use a big and powerful voice. Because here we get this like impact of using a voice moment, the handler putting his head inside the lion's mouth, assuring us all that that was going to be fine. But in fact, there is tremendous impact for the handler putting his head in the lion's mouth. So let's just flip that and say there's tremendous impact that Megan has felt by putting her head in the mouth of the lion, taking risks, speaking up, trying to be powerful with her voice. And maybe she's sad about that, you know. I would love her to have been here to sort of like get some of these subtleties. It's like, is she weary of being angry and loud in the past about things? I don't know if this dream is reflecting her thinking about world events at the moment, but we're all in this crazy world. And I can imagine the lion as being Megan's ferocity of that's not right and that's not right. And I will lead, you know, myself through the charge of using my powerful voice. But not only is the fucking lion tired and like done, there's, you know, this like, we're done. I'm chewing off the head of the handler. So I feel like I'm talking about two themes here a little bit, and I'm not sure that they blend. So one to me feels like it might be talking about impact from Megan's past and trying to birth a new way of being in the world. For sure that, if you know, we know that just by simply the fact that the dreams happened in May, which means they're current. And it does mean that there's a new way that Megan needs to create to move through the world, that she's overwhelmed with the idea of feeding it. Whether that's a new project or new circumstances or a new way to perceive a world gone mad where we have to be in it and try not to be of it.
Yeah.
So the fact that we flash cut to the hospital is then Megan is directly in consideration of, see, there's impact if I speak up. Now, inside this warehouse, there's this group of people. If we think of this as Megan's dream landscape, then those people are like thoughts inside of Megan's psyche. But they're touring, right? So they're not organic to this scenario. They're like visiting. So that to me is like there's some current thought form that's emerging that might be either new or like feels foreign. You know, if Megan's not here, so I'm overly sort of assuming here, but let's just say that this is about how does she orient herself towards a world where she's both angry and afraid and, you know, all of the stuff that we all are. That she's trying to birth a new perspective that just isn't like the roaring of the past, but is, you know, somehow suited for the time. She had the dream in May. That means this spring, something new wants to be created. Megan, you know what that is because you're living your life. I think it's about vulnerability and communication. So if we're on the right track, send us an email and let us know. And if we weren't, let us know that too. But definitely thank you for sharing this fun dream.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.